I was miles into my solo hike through the Sierra Nevada when I saw the email notification flash across my phone screen. The subject line read, "We need to talk." At first, I thought it was just a random spam message or a simple check-in from work, but something told me it was important. I pulled my pack to the side of the trail, sat on a rock, and opened the message. The words blurred together, but the meaning hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife, Claire, had filed for divorce. The email detailed everything she had done in my absence, emptied our joint account, moved in her new boyfriend, Ben, and made arrangements for the house in Denver to be sold. It was all done. She had moved on. The cold detachment of her words felt like a slap in the face. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I just felt acceptance. There was no fight left in me. The way she had been acting for the past few months, the distant looks, the late nights at work, the sudden interest in her appearance, it all made sense now. I wasn't surprised by her actions, I'd been sensing something was wrong for a while. Instead of lashing out, I just closed the phone and slipped it back into my pack. I had a long hike ahead of me, and I wasn't about to let something like this ruin my solitude. I would deal with it later, in my own time. I wasn't going to let her or her decisions derail me. So, I continued walking, my boots crunching along the rocky trail, the air crisp and cool. The scenery was beautiful, but it felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. My thoughts were occupied with the calmness of the mountains and the certainty that things had already reached their conclusion. There was no need to rush, everything was already in motion. The hike had been planned as a retreat, a few days away from everything to clear my mind. After nearly 2 decades in the army, the constant noise of family life, deployments, and responsibility had begun to weigh heavily on me. I needed the silence, the stillness of nature, to center myself. But instead, I found myself sitting on a boulder in the middle of the Sierra Nevadas, reading an email that would change everything. I stared at the screen for a while, reading the words over and over, not because I didn't understand them, but because I wanted to grasp at some feeling, something, anything to push back the emptiness I felt. I had been married to Claire for 17 years, and in those 17 years, I had seen the signs. The little cracks in our relationship, the moments where we grew apart, but I'd been too busy, too consumed with my duty, to pay attention. The thought of confronting her had crossed my mind more than once, but I'd been afraid of what I might find and even more afraid of what I might lose if I opened that door. And now, the door was wide open. There was no denying it anymore. She had left, moved on, and there was nothing I could do to change it. A slight breeze whispered through the trees, brushing against my face, and I breathed in deeply, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I had never been one to show emotion easily, especially in front of others. The army had taught me how to compartmentalize, to process everything in a controlled way, to never let anyone see the cracks. But in that moment, alone on the mountainside, I felt more vulnerable than I ever had in my life. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I was indifferent. It was as though the emotional weight of everything had been lifted from my shoulders, but it wasn't a relief. It was more like numbness. For a man who had spent so much of his life in high-pressure situations, training soldiers, running missions, facing danger head-on, the quiet acceptance of his own personal downfall was a strange thing. How do you react when the battle has already been lost before you even had a chance to fight? I pushed the thought aside. There was no use dwelling on it. I had a long journey ahead of me, both literally and figuratively, and I wasn't about to let this email consume me while I was alone in the wilderness. The trail before me stretched endlessly into the mountains, winding through towering trees and over rocky ridges. I focused on the path, one foot in front of the other, trying to settle into the rhythm of the hike. The physical exertion felt good. My body was alive, moving, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about anyone else. It wasn't about Claire, or Ben, or even the divorce. It was about the moment, the here and now. The thought of Claire, her new life with Ben, flashed through my mind, but I quickly pushed it aside, burying it beneath the steady pace of my boots against the earth. I wasn't ready to deal with that yet. There would be time for that later, when I returned to reality. For now, all I could focus on was the trail in front of me, the peace of the mountains, and the silence that wrapped itself around me like a blanket. It felt like the end of something, but it also felt like the beginning. The beginning of something new, even if I didn't know what that something was yet. Maybe it would be a new chapter in my life. Maybe it would be just more of the same. But as I continued to walk, alone in the mountains, I realized that I didn't need to know what came next. Not yet. For the first time in a long time, I had no expectations, no agenda. Just me, the trail, and the quiet. I took a deep breath and kept walking. I wasn't running from the past, I had made my peace with it. But I was ready to face whatever came next. Looking back, the signs had been there long before I ever opened that email. They were subtle at first, easy to ignore, especially when I was wrapped up in the demands of my work. After all, I was a 42-year-old Army sergeant, dedicated to my duty and my mission. But there were days when I couldn't avoid noticing the distance between Claire and me growing wider with each passing month. I should have paid more attention, I suppose, but I was too caught up in the rhythm of my life. When Claire started working late more often, I brushed it off. She'd always been ambitious, driven, and I figured it was just a phase. But it wasn't just that. She began spending more time at the gym, something she hadn't done before. She'd come back looking flushed and winded, but the physical changes were subtle, almost non-existent. It wasn't that I expected a dramatic transformation, but something about it felt off. She'd stand in front of the mirror, adjusting her clothes, as though she were inspecting herself for something she was trying to fix. And yet, she was always critical of herself, never satisfied. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. I'd seen the subtle shifts in her habits, but I kept convincing myself it was just a phase. She was stressed, I told myself. There were changes in her life that I didn't understand. Maybe she was looking for something new, something more fulfilling. But whatever it was, she wasn't talking to me about it. And it started to feel like every time I tried to start a conversation, she found a way to avoid it. She'd come home late from work, often saying she had to meet a colleague or finish up a project. She started leaving the house earlier and earlier in the mornings, spending weekends away with friends that I had never met. Her friends, when they did come over, seemed distant. Like they knew something I didn't. They'd speak in low tones, exchanging knowing glances that left me feeling like an outsider in my own home. There was always something about it that made me feel like I didn't belong anymore, but I kept my mouth shut. The more she changed, the more I stayed the same. I couldn't let the uncertainty in our relationship disrupt my focus. I had a job to do, a responsibility to my men, to my country. So, I compartmentalized, even as Claire's behavior became more erratic. I started to feel it more when she'd give me that distant look at the dinner table, or when she'd spend an entire evening on her phone, texting someone, her back turned to me as I tried to talk to her. It was as though she had an entire life I wasn't part of, a secret world she was living in without me. And the more I ignored it, the more it ate at me. But there was something I didn't expect, something that hit me harder than the growing silence between us. One night, I noticed her phone had a new password, one she'd never used before. It was an innocuous change, but it felt like a wall going up between us. I didn't confront her about it. I didn't accuse her of anything. But that moment, that simple change, made me wonder what else I didn't know. I didn't ask her about it, though. I never did. I suppose I was afraid of what I might hear, or maybe I was afraid of what would happen if I pushed her. I wasn't ready to face whatever the truth was. So, I started taking precautions, quietly. I opened a separate bank account in my name, making sure a portion of my salary went there every month. I wasn't expecting anything to happen right away, but I had to protect myself. It was the little things that began to pile up, an offhand remark here, a sudden shift in behavior there, that made me realize Claire was becoming someone I didn't recognize. Her new habits, her new friends, her secretive behavior. But I never said anything. I couldn't. I had to trust that maybe she just needed space, maybe she was going through something, and she didn't know how to talk about it. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I could feel the change in the air, a tension I couldn't explain. It wasn't just about the late nights or the new phone password. It was about something deeper, something fundamental that was eroding the foundation of our marriage. I could feel it in the silence, in the absence of conversation, in the way she'd look at me like she was seeing a stranger. Despite all of it, I chose to wait. I didn't confront her. I didn't push her. Maybe it was denial, or maybe it was just the soldier in me, trained to stay calm and make preparations, no matter how chaotic things seemed. And so, I kept quiet, focused on the things I could control, hoping that somehow, things would work themselves out. But deep inside, I knew I was only fooling myself. The signs were there. They had been there all along. I just hadn't wanted to see them. By the time I left for my latest deployment, the cracks were so wide that I could no longer ignore them. Claire's goodbye was dry, almost mechanical, like she was just going through the motions. There was no warmth, no promise of waiting for me. No words of comfort or affection. Just a quick, impersonal hug, and then she was gone. I didn't think much of it then, but in hindsight, that dry hug spoke volumes. That was the moment I realized that things were already over, even though I hadn't faced it yet. It had been over for a while, but I was too blind to see it until it was already too late. When I left, I didn't have a real sense of farewell, only the cold certainty that our marriage, as I had known it, had come to an end. And deep down, I knew it wasn't going to come back. It had already slipped through my fingers. The weeks after I left for my deployment were a blur of military routine, long days, brief moments of respite, and the constant hum of an unfamiliar, foreign land. But no matter where I was, the thoughts of Claire never fully left me. The changes in her behavior, the strange distance between us, continued to gnaw at me. Still, I never let it show. I stayed focused on my work, my team, the mission. I had to. But every now and then, I would catch myself thinking about her, wondering what she was doing, who she was with. The emails from her were few and far between. Her messages became shorter, more perfunctory. She'd update me on trivial things, how the house was holding up, that she was keeping busy, and the occasional reminder to be safe. There was a strange kind of detachment in her words, something that made it clear she wasn't thinking of me the way she once had. It was almost as if she was writing to a stranger, not to the man she had married. Still, I chose not to confront her. I told myself that it was just a phase. Maybe the distance was simply a result of me being away, of the stress of my job, of her trying to find her own space in the world. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something more to it, something I didn't want to face but couldn't avoid forever. And then, one day, it all came crashing down. I was sitting in a small break room at the base when I received a notification on my phone, a message from my bank. I hadn't expected anything alarming, but when I opened the alert, my heart sank. It was a notification about a significant withdrawal from our joint account. $50,000 had been drained, and the money had been transferred in multiple, seemingly random increments. I stared at the screen for a moment, unsure of what I was seeing. I had to read the message again, then again. It was real. It was happening. My mind went into overdrive, trying to process the information. Claire. She'd done it. She had drained our savings, our entire life savings, and I was nowhere near home to stop it. The worst part was the timing. The largest withdrawal had been made the day after I left for deployment. A part of me had already suspected something was off, but this? This was betrayal in its purest form. It wasn't just the money. It was everything. The months of her growing indifference. The secretive phone calls, the nights spent alone. The changes in her appearance, her behavior. I had been blind to the warning signs, too busy with the demands of my job to confront them. But now, there was no denying it. I had been living in a house of cards, and Claire had just swept it all away. I couldn't do anything about it in that moment, but I knew I had to act. I felt my blood pressure rise as I stood up from the table. The walls of the break room seemed to close in on me, and I stepped outside, trying to get some air, trying to clear my mind. I didn't want to confront her, not yet. I couldn't, especially not from this far away. But I also knew that I needed to start protecting myself. The first thing I did was take out my phone and open a new, secure account. I moved what little money I had left into it, making sure Claire wouldn't have access to it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how calculated everything had been. This wasn't just about the money. This was about something deeper. It was about control, about power. For months, Claire had been pulling away from me, emotionally and physically. She had been setting herself up for something I hadn't seen coming, even though the signs had been clear. Maybe, in some way, she had been preparing for this moment long before I left for deployment. I needed to know more. So, I quietly began gathering evidence. I started with the emails and bank records, tracking the trail of money Claire had withdrawn. I knew this wasn't enough, there had to be more. And then I remembered something else, the refinancing attempt. It had started as a passing thought when I was home last. Claire had mentioned something about needing to refinance the house. She'd been vague about it, saying it was to help with some expenses, but I hadn't paid much attention to it at the time. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more behind it. I decided to look into it further. When I returned from deployment, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I checked into a motel under an alias and contacted a lawyer. The lawyer, a no-nonsense guy named Brad, took the time to go over everything I had gathered so far, and we quickly realized that Claire had gone even further than I had initially thought. She had attempted to refinance the house, but not in a way that was above board. She had forged my signature on documents, trying to take control of the property. The documents had been submitted to a local real estate agent, a man named Daniel Spencer, who had a history of shady deals, most notably involving military families. It didn't take long for Brad to confirm what I had already suspected. Claire had been working with Spencer and, worst of all, Ben, her boyfriend, to pull off a scam. They had been planning to sell our house at a fraction of its worth, stealing money from me, and likely from other soldiers like me, to line their pockets. They were targeting military families, knowing that many soldiers were often away, unable to protect their property. It was a well-orchestrated scheme, and I had been completely blindsided. I felt a wave of disgust wash over me. Not only had Claire betrayed me emotionally, but she had been actively trying to ruin me financially as well. It was no longer just about her actions, it was about everything she had built behind my back, everything she had plotted while I was away, serving my country. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The feeling of betrayal that had gripped me months ago now seemed to morph into something sharper, colder, and far more calculated. Claire had crossed a line, one that I couldn't ignore, no matter how much I had convinced myself to stay calm, to stay detached. This wasn't just about a marriage falling apart. This was about something much bigger. This was about fraud, deception, and the manipulation of the very things that I had worked so hard to build. She had pulled me into a web of lies and deceit, and I was done being a passive observer. I couldn't just stand by and let her get away with it. But I knew that confronting her directly would only give her the chance to cover her tracks even further. She was already knee-deep in this scam with Ben and that shady real estate agent, Daniel Spencer. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a criminal conspiracy that had been set in motion long before I had any inkling of it. That night in the motel, after Brad and I had gone over everything, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Claire. Not yet, anyway. Instead, I was going to act swiftly and methodically. I would freeze the assets, put legal barriers in place, and make sure she couldn't continue with her plan to destroy everything I had worked for. I had learned, over the years, how to think strategically. The army had taught me how to compartmentalize, how to assess threats, and how to take action when the situation required it. This situation was no different. Claire had made her move, but now it was my turn. The next day, I met with my lawyer again. We went over the paperwork, gathered the evidence, and filed the necessary motions to freeze the joint accounts. Brad's connections in the legal world were solid, and he managed to get the court to issue an emergency injunction, preventing Claire from further accessing the assets. It was a small victory, but it was enough to slow her down. Over the following weeks, I took additional steps. I submitted a formal challenge to the forged refinance documents, making sure the bank knew that they were fraudulent. The more I dug into the details, the more I realized how far Claire and Ben had gone. They had even enlisted the help of a crooked agent who had been dealing in below-market sales for years, targeting soldiers who were too busy with their deployments to watch over their properties. I felt the anger begin to bubble beneath the surface as I thought about how Claire, the woman I had married, had become a part of this scheme. But still, I didn't confront her. It wasn't the time. Instead, I focused on gathering more evidence. Every email, every transaction, every communication that connected Claire, Ben, and Spencer, I documented it all. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was protecting everyone who might be caught in the same trap, everyone who might not be aware of the scam that Claire had been a part of. The more I learned, the more disgusted I became. Claire had never been one to shy away from luxury, she had always enjoyed the finer things in life. But now, she wasn't just living a life of indulgence. She was systematically stripping away the security of families like ours, people who trusted each other, who relied on one another. It wasn't just about our marriage anymore, it was about a larger betrayal, one that threatened to affect countless others. Still, as the days passed, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was more to come. I had only scratched the surface, but the walls of Claire's deception were closing in. She couldn't hide forever. Then, I learned something that I hadn't expected. Brad called me one morning, his voice tense on the other end of the line. "Nathan, you need to hear this," he said, and I could tell from the tone of his voice that something had changed. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "Claire," he said, pausing for a moment, "she's been working with someone bigger than just Spencer. Ben's not just some guy she's sleeping with. He's been part of a larger network, targeting military families. This isn't just about you and her. This goes deeper. You've got to hear this." Brad explained that, through some additional investigation, they had uncovered a pattern of fraudulent sales involving multiple properties tied to military personnel. Ben, the man Claire had brought into our home, had been at the center of it all. He wasn't just a boyfriend, he was a key player in a larger conspiracy, one that involved stealing from men and women who had no idea they were being targeted. The FBI had already gotten involved. They were in the process of investigating the entire ring, and Claire was implicated. It was as if everything had come full circle. The web she had woven was unraveling quickly, and I was a part of it now, whether I liked it or not. But I wasn't going to let this go without making sure she paid the price for everything she had done. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the justice that had been denied to so many people, including me. I couldn't just walk away from this, no matter how much I had wanted to, no matter how tired I was of fighting. Claire had crossed a line. And now, it was time to make sure she faced the consequences. I knew there would be more battles ahead, legal battles, emotional battles, but I also knew this was my moment to take control. I had been blind for far too long, but now I was awake. And I wasn't about to let Claire's betrayal go unpunished. The war wasn't over. But this was my first victory. The aftermath of everything that had unfolded hit me like a wave, slowly creeping up until it was crashing over me in relentless force. The legal battles, the discoveries, the mounting evidence, it was all happening so fast, faster than I could fully process. But I had no choice but to keep going. It wasn't just about me anymore, it was about all the people Claire had harmed along the way. Brad had been in contact with the FBI, feeding them information about Claire, Ben, and Daniel Spencer's fraudulent dealings. As the investigation deepened, it became clear that what I had initially thought was a personal betrayal had turned into something much more insidious. Claire wasn't just a woman who had fallen out of love with me, she was part of a much larger scheme, and she had been actively working with Ben and Spencer to exploit military families, selling their homes at cut rates while pocketing the difference. The depth of their operation was staggering. Over the next few weeks, the FBI got involved, and the investigation started to take shape. With the help of Brad and my lawyer, I was able to compile the final pieces of the puzzle: emails, transaction records, forged documents. Everything Claire and her partners had been doing behind my back was now on paper. It was a criminal enterprise, targeting people like me, soldiers who were often away from home and unaware of the malicious dealings taking place in their absence. I never expected it to go this far. When Claire first started changing, when the distance between us grew, I thought I was just losing my wife, but I had never imagined that the woman I had married was capable of betraying me on such a grand scale. She wasn't just stealing from me, she was stealing from dozens of other families, all while hiding behind a facade of innocence. Through it all, Claire tried to maintain her image. She painted herself as a victim, claiming that she was manipulated by Ben and didn't realize the full extent of what they were doing. She even went as far as to tell the FBI that she had no idea about the fraudulent transactions, that she was simply following Ben's lead. But the evidence was irrefutable. She had forged my signature to refinance our house. She had withdrawn tens of thousands of dollars from our account. She had used her own husband's military benefits to fuel a scam that had already affected others. Her story didn't hold up. The evidence was too solid, and the case was far too compelling. As the FBI closed in on the investigation, Claire and Ben were charged with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Daniel Spencer, the real estate agent at the heart of the scheme, was arrested as well. The investigation was far-reaching, with other military families coming forward, sharing their stories of how their homes had been stolen from them in similar ways. The moment the FBI served Claire with the papers was almost surreal. I wasn't there when it happened, but I received a call from my lawyer, telling me that she had been arrested. She had spent so much of our marriage trying to build a life of luxury and comfort, but now, she was facing the consequences of her actions. The irony wasn't lost on me. In the end, it wasn't her new life with Ben that had won, it was the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, had a way of coming to light. But I still wasn't ready to see her face to face. I didn't know if I ever would be. As much as the anger had built up inside me over the years, there was nothing left to say. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. There was no room for forgiveness in this situation, only accountability. As the investigation progressed, Claire's life started to unravel in ways I never could have imagined. The court proceedings dragged on for months, with the FBI digging deeper into her connections with Ben and Spencer, uncovering other properties that had been sold under fraudulent pretenses. Claire's attempt to spin the narrative in her favor had failed miserably. Throughout the entire ordeal, I kept my distance. I didn't need to see her. I didn't need to hear her excuses. The woman who had once shared my life was gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable, someone who had let greed and selfishness destroy everything we had built together. The divorce was finalized months after the investigation started, but by then, the outcome was never in doubt. I had already made my peace with the fact that the woman I had loved no longer existed. The person who stood before me now, the one who had betrayed me and others, was nothing more than a stranger. With the divorce final and the legal battles over, I was left to pick up the pieces of my life. Claire's arrest and the unfolding investigation left me feeling hollow, but I didn't have time to dwell on it for long. I had other things to focus on now, my future, my peace of mind, my freedom. The weight of the past was heavy, but it was no longer mine to carry. The FBI's investigation continued to uncover more details about the conspiracy. Ben and Daniel Spencer were arrested, and both were sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Claire, too, faced a substantial amount of jail time, but her life was forever changed. The woman who had once been my partner was now facing the consequences of her actions. For me, the finality of it all brought a strange sense of relief. As much as I had once loved Claire, as much as I had once wanted to save her, I knew that I couldn't change what had already been done. The best I could do now was move forward. And so, I did. I sold the house. The memories of betrayal were too much to bear. I took the proceeds and bought a small cabin in the woods, far from the life I had once known. There, in the quiet, I began to rebuild. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. I kept busy with small jobs, doing whatever I could to keep my mind occupied. Slowly, but surely, the peace I had longed for began to return. One day, out of the blue, I received a letter. It was from a woman in Texas, whose husband had been deployed at the same time I had. She thanked me for bringing the fraud to light, for helping save her home. It was a small thing, a simple gesture, but in that moment, it was everything. It reminded me that, despite the painful end to my marriage, I had done something good. I had made a difference in the lives of people who needed it. And that, in the end, was what mattered most.